I'm going to go ahead and get us started here. Welcome, everyone. I wanted to kind of start things off with a big thank you for joining us this morning. This is our third event in our Data Plus Diversity series, and we're just thrilled that all of y'all from across the country, across the world, are able to join us today. My name is Renee McCloud, and I'm a senior manager here on the marketing team at Tableau, and I'll be kicking off today's program with a brief chat with Sedale McCall. And Sedale, some of you may know, is a member of our new Community Equity Taskforce, and we hope to have an Equity Taskforce member join us for each of our Data Plus Diversity events going forward. So you can all get acquainted with some of the community leaders focused on these efforts. And then next, we'll have VP of Data Visualization and Training at Lovelytics and Tableau Zen Master, Chantilly Jagannath, host a fireside chat and with our guest speaker, Jessica O. Matthews, founder and CEO of Uncharted Power. Before I chat with Sedale and before we hear from Chantilly and Jessica, I'd like to talk about the year we've had and talk a little bit about the future of the series. So, as some of you may know, when we launched the Data Plus Diversity events last year, we knew we wanted to address existing challenges and solutions to diversity in analytics, foster brave conversations around diversity, inclusion, and allyship. We know that data can bring bigger, greater accountability to diversity efforts, including our own work at Tableau and within the Tableau community. And without addressing intersectional diversity in our work, we will fail. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. So this year, as we go forward, we plan to tackle topics and highlight community voices reflecting not only racial and gender diversity, but also veterans, individuals who identify as neurodiverse, people of varying abilities, and other underrepresented members of the community. So please expect to see changes in how we format future events, making sure that they're more accessibility friendly, and that we're kind of highlighting these intersectional stories and voices and experiences. So we must continue to use these analytic skills, this privilege, platforms that we have to create a more inclusive, representative space. We want to drive action and positive change. So we do hope that you will continue to join us, to feel inspired, to take part, right? Participate and join us in shaping a more equitable future that we can all be proud of. So without further ado, I would very happily like to welcome Sedale McCall, Digital Intelligence and Insights Analyst at Purple Strategies. Sedale is a member of the DC Tableau User Group, leader of the Analytics Tableau User Group, Tableau featured author, and a member of the Community Equity Taskforce. So welcome, Sedale.
Thank you. I'm really, really happy to be here. And thank you for the words before that, because I think it's really important to the work that we'll be doing in the task force, the conversations we'll be having in this event as well. So I really appreciate that setup.
Oh, absolutely. And again, just to say it one more time, really thrilled to have you here.
Yeah.
So maybe to get started, for the folks who maybe haven't had a chance to learn as much about you, maybe share a little bit about yourself and your background.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Sedale McCall. As Renee mentioned, I'm a digital insights analyst at a company called Purple Strategies. And it's a bunch of fancy words to say I'm a digital researcher. My job is to help clients and individuals and whoever we're doing work for really understand what the digital media landscape looks like for them. We're in DC, so a lot of it has an advocacy tinge or public affairs or policy. But we do a lot of work in helping people really understand and navigate their media environments, and a lot of that comes from digital data and online data sources. And so that's where Tableau comes in, helping to kind of aggregate that data and really analyze it and derive insights from that work. I'd like to say that Tableau was my quarantine hobby. I spent a lot of last year really getting deep into the community. I got my first certification last summer. Renee mentioned the Tableau featured author, which was awesome. And then toward the end of the year, joined this awesome task force, and then started another Tableau user group with Annabelle, where we focus on analytics and Tableau desktop. So a lot of really cool things happen that really kind of led me to this point today.
Awesome. And can we talk a little more about that? And I would love to hear more about like your journey with the Tableau community. Can you share what that's been like? And
Yeah, it's been amazing. Those that have been a part of the Tableau community for some time probably have heard this story before, but it's one of and a lot of really awesome individuals that help, not only to build my skills, but also to build my profile, to build the ways in which I think about data and data analysis. And so I started doing this work maybe 2017, but really got into the DC Tableau user group around 2019, early 2019. And I was kind of, ushered in by the folks there, Brittany Fong, Chantilly. I met Chantilly at a DC Tug event. Um, Eric Balish, who is a really great Tableau Sherpa, and he kind of took me under his wing and invited me to some events within the Tableau community online, and that's really where I got to know all the great people, across the world and across the country in the Tableau community, and that's how I started to learn more about what they were doing in terms of diversity and inclusion, what they were doing in terms of the Tableau user groups and the Tableau ambassadors, and all the different ways to think about Tableau, all the different meeting types. I spoke on Wednesday for the analytics tug. Last week I spoke to the Boston tug. I'll be speaking to the healthcare tug event, coming up in the next few weeks. And so it's really just been an awesome journey, but created by the support and the encouragement that the community brings.
awesome. And we mentioned a little bit earlier in the call about the Equity Task Force. Could you share a little bit about that? What gets you excited about it? What's your perspective there?
Yeah, I mean, even before I joined the task force and we started doing any work, it kind of felt like two of my passions kind of colliding. So when I'm not doing Tableau work or doing my personal job, I try to talk and think and write about this in a lot of different formats. I joined my local chapter of the NAACP, actually lead communication for the Fairfax County NAACP, which is one of the bigger chapters in the state. And even at my job, trying to work within certain groups to help advance diversity among my own company. And so for a while, I was doing data for major corporations and Fortune 500s to help people make more money. And then I would go home and I would do social justice to advance equity in my communities. And so being able to bring those two things together was already amazing. I'd say the other thing that makes me really excited about this task force are the individuals. If you haven't gone to the website, definitely check it out. The 12 individuals on this task force are some of the best minds to come together and do this work. We won't be doing it alone, but having this group kind of come together and lead this task force, I think is going to be just incredible.
That's awesome. And can I just tell you how much that what you said resonated about bringing those two pieces together?
Yeah.
There is just something beautiful about after like walking these parallel paths to bring them together. I feel that.
Absolutely.
So just going a little bit further on one of your points, it would be great to hear a little bit about your favorite resources. Is there anything that you would call out for folks if they want to learn more?
Yeah, especially as it pertains to the ideas around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think, for us as folks in the data community, but really you could think about it in whatever community you view yourself as a part of. I think there's like a macro view of it and there's kind of the micro view. I think the macro level are some of the things you think about. So How to Be an Anti-Racist was this very kind of popular resource that people were using. And it's a great book because it helps people define terms a little bit. Obviously, Dr. Kendi did not come up with the term anti-racist, but he definitely popularized it in the book. But he does a really great job of explaining how it works, what it looks like, even beyond race. He looks at all the intersectional aspects of diversity and inclusion, which you noted earlier. So books like that, The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates is a great kind of novel narrative version of it, which was a fantastic book. Uh, Anything by Michael Eric Dyson, I would note I believe it was called The Lies We Tell. It was a sermon sermon-esque book that he gave, which was a fantastic read around acknowledging some of the issues and things of the past that were really important to note in order to make it toward a future. So that's kind of the micro level. And then I think coming down to looking at it from a data perspective, Kathy O'Neill wrote a book called Weapons of Math Destruction, and
Mhm.
it's very interesting. Title aside, very interesting, and we think about how data and models and algorithms be just as biased as the individuals. We like to think that
Mhm.
algorithms are completely unbiased and objective, but if the person that constructs them does so with a bias, that's just as biased and just as harmful. And so she talks
Mhm.
about how that leads to disproportionate sentencing, harsher sentencing for certain populations. How the Uber algorithm may go to only certain parts of town based on
Mhm.
any number of reasons, and the different things. The Google images is a kind of a popular example where it's the recognition doesn't work as well for diverse populations, and so those things are really great resources as well to kind of think about. Data can be really useful, and there's lots of other people that I could give, but really trying to think about those two levels, I think, is how I go about it.
I think that makes a ton of sense, and I love what you're talking about in terms of like the language piece, having a consistent language, having an understanding of the nuance, which kind of comes back to those intersectional elements that we were
Yeah.
talking about earlier. Um, Super helpful and some really great resources. Thank you. Um,
Yeah.
so one of the other elements we have been thinking about is um, how can we sorry, how can we make sure that we're kind of driving a more inclusive community and continue to do that? Like, what are your thoughts on how we can continue to be better at creating a diverse community?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And I think, to me, the number one way, I mean, I could talk about this all day, but I would say the number one way is to be willing to be wrong. Be okay with being in a vulnerable position where you may not have the correct answer. As I mentioned, I talk about this with the NAACP and with my job and all these, areas. And the most frustrating conversations are the ones where the organization wants to say, how can we show that we're committed to diversity? How can we prove to people? How can we put out an ad? How can we put out this message that says that we're already doing it, that we are
Mhm.
part of the good guys? And it's the total wrong question to ask, because it assumes that there's nothing left to do, that there's no more work to be done with your organization, and it puts you in a place where you can be comfortable. And that's what leadership wants to do, is they want to be comfortable, and I understand that. But if you're not willing to get it wrong, it's going to be really tough to be inclusive. And if you're inclusive already and you're doing things in the right way, you won't need to show it. Well, we know you won't need to prove it at all. Chantilly will be later. Her group, Millennials in Data, they have cohorts every so often that she trains up, and she doesn't need to say, look at how diverse our cohort is, right? Like, she
Right.
just says, here are the people that graduated, and you can look at them and you
Yep.
already get it. There's no need to prove it. So you have to be willing to just be open and honest and authentic, and then from there be okay with the fact that you may not get everything right, and then the inclusion piece kind of comes with it.
No, I absolutely, and I really appreciate the level of vulnerability that's required, and
Yeah.
that's kind of in a lot of different ways. Um, to be able to create a new path, right? It's like when you're doing anything, like you're creating new pathways in your brain, you're challenging
Yeah.
yourself to take a left when you always take a right, you know? So I think that's incredible. So there are lots of people tuned in today. You have been sharing such beautiful kind of insight and conversation. Um, when you're thinking about what people should reach out to you about, what would that look like? Can you talk a little bit about that with us in the audience?
Yeah, and I'll say quickly, just as a human that's interested in this stuff, feel free to reach out to me for any number of reasons, task force related or not. If you look up my name, Sedale McCall. I am literally the only Sedale McCall on the planet, so you will find me everywhere. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn and all those good places, and I love having these conversations. So if you're interested in talking about this, I'm open to do it. When it comes to the task force, though, I really, really, one of my biggest beliefs around the task force is that we are messengers, we're harbingers, we may even be influencers of the data community and what have you, but we are not going to bring equity with just the 12 of us. We are not going to rain down equity upon the data community. So, please come to me now that you know my name, and as you hear other names, reach out to those people. If there are ways that you see diversity and inclusion and equity in the community, there are gaps that you want to bring up, even if it's something you think we're already doing, reach out to us, let us know so that we can bring those thoughts into the conversations that we're having and the efforts that we're making. Because the way that this will work is that we will point into the community to get all of the insights from them and then turning it into work. But it can't be the opposite. So reach out to us. Please let us know what you think about it, where we might be getting things right, where we might be getting things wrong. Again, going back to that vulnerability, I am not assuming I understand exactly how to make the entire community more equitable, diverse, and inclusive. So if you have ways that you think I can get better at that, please, reach out, let me know.
Awesome, thank you. And well, you heard it, folks. Like, let's get vulnerable. Reach out with your questions, your ideas. We want to have this conversation, and by having a diversity of perspectives and conversations, that's part of the way we're going to do it. I think that's beautiful, Sedale. So thank you. Thank you for sharing more about yourself. I know we're about out of time, but appreciated hearing about you, about your experiences with the Community Equity Task Force. But now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pass it over to Chantilly, who will be chatting with our guest speaker, Jess O. Matthews, today. So again, thank you, Sedale, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Chantilly.
Thank you so much, Renee. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah. Perfect.
All right, perfect. Thank you both so much. That was it was a beautiful start to our event today. Hello, everyone. Thanks again, Renee and Sedale, for speaking to us about the Community Task Force, the Equity Task Force, and for sharing, the goals for the Data Plus Diversity events that we're having this year. And thank you, Tableau, for inviting me back to host today's Fireside Chat with the brilliant Jessica O. Matthews, founder and CEO of Uncharted Power. And to today's attendees, thank you for taking the time to join us for these important discussions that affect the Tableau community and the future of analytics. Analytics as a field and the related work that we do, modeling, prepping, visualizations, must be inclusive, not only from an ethical and equity perspective, but also from an accuracy and strategy perspective. And that's why we're all here today. We're working for greater diversity and inclusion in this space. For those of you who do not know me, I am Chantilly Jagannath. I'm currently a Tableau Zen Master, Tableau Public Ambassador, and Vice President of Data Visualization for Lovelytics, a Tableau consulting partner. I'm also the founder and CEO of the nonprofit organization Millennials in Data, #MAD, which I started in 2018 with the mission to bridge the data literacy and analytical skills gap among millennials by training and mentoring them. As Renee mentioned earlier, this has been a year, a month, and even a week to remember. While we are currently seeing a lot of political and social disruption, that isn't always positive, we can't ignore the positive, the powerful disruption happening around us as well. I'm talking about the kind of innovation that is happening at different intersections of society, creating better futures for all. We've invited our brilliant guest speaker, Jessica O. Matthews, to join us today because Jessica is an innovator and pioneer changing the world at the intersection of disruptive technology, renewable energy, human behavior, and the psychology of self-actualization. Jessica describes herself as the Beyonce Bill Nye hybrid, which I absolutely love, and is the founder and CEO of Uncharted Power. an award-winning sustainable infrastructure company that streamlines integration, deployment, and management of critical infrastructure like power lines, broadband, sidewalks, and water pipes. Her entrepreneurship has led to an invitation to the White House to represent small companies, and in 2016 helped her raise what was at the time the largest Series A funding ever raised by a Black female founder. It's amazing. Not surprisingly, Jessica has been named one of Forbes 30 Under 30, Inc. magazine's 30 Under 30, Harvard University Scientist of the Year, one of Fortune's most promising women entrepreneurs, among many other accolades. We are so honored to have Jessica join us today to talk about her extraordinary story, Uncharted Power, and the power data has to transform history. Welcome, Jessica.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome.
Thank you guys so much. Thank you for the humbling intro and for all the work that you continue to do. I'm a fan as well, to say the least. And thank you, Tableau, for having me as well on this Friday to chat about some good stuff.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Awesome. So I know I shared a little bit about you already, but for everyone that has just tuned in, tell us a little bit more about yourself and Uncharted Power.
No problem. What to know about me? I mean, I got into all of this not because I woke up one day and, ran some models and said infrastructure is the way. I believe that entrepreneurship is problem solving without regard for resource, right? And so the first thing that you need to do to figure out what problem you want to solve, right? And the problem that you're going to want to solve so bad that you don't care whether or not you have everything you need. In my opinion, it starts with your intersectionality. It starts with all the things that make you who you are. Oftentimes, I think in the workplace, people kind of lean back away from that. I really think, the key is not to code switch, but actually to just focus in on it and find it. And so for me, that means really meditating and being very, just authentic around the fact that I'm a dual citizen of Nigeria and the United States. I was born in upstate New York, but I'm 100% Nigerian. My father lives in Nigeria. My cousins live in Nigeria. Essentially I split my time growing up in both places. And that made a huge, huge difference in the way I saw the world, right? Only in Nigeria would my cousins have a better cell phone than I did and laugh at me, but only have 10% charge, right? And it was that weird feeling, that weird vibe. I remember being at my aunt's house and seeing just mounds of garbage being burned across the street and being so this is it. We all okay with this? And I think that, plus being a woman, being a Black woman in this world and the way, you kind of feel like, you feel like you get this, I don't know if they teach it to us or what it is, but you feel like you have to carry the family on your shoulders. You feel like you have to carry the will to kind of get up and keep going on your shoulders. You're taught to kind of be the strong one in some ways, I think. And then, just having experiences where I felt, okay, well then who in my family need help? How do they need help and what's going on? Really dictated a lot in terms of what got me into this world. And so for me, I was spending a lot of time growing up, going back and forth between Nigeria and the US. And I think everything kind of started to click when I was 17. I was in Nigeria. I was at my aunt's wedding. So the thing about Nigeria and a lot of places in the global South, before we were realizing how bad the infrastructure problems were here, before we were really talking about there's a little bit of wind and now we don't got power for a week, or what's popping, why is it that, a quarter of the kids can't go to school during COVID because they don't have internet? Before that was a thing 10, 15 years ago, that was something that I was very aware of because that's what my family was living in Nigeria, right? And so I had this I saw it as an opportunity to know that this didn't have to be the way, but I think a lot of my peers in the US, they saw infrastructure as something that worked. They felt like power worked. They felt like everything was okay. Hey, water should just be clean. Again, this is before Flint. I'm in Nigeria and I'm like, if we try to emulate what's going on in the US, we see actually that it's not working. So I didn't have this false sense of security about what infrastructure is, right, versus what it needs to be. And so in Nigeria, we would expect to lose power. That's just one of the things that we would expect. And it wasn't a socioeconomic thing. In fact, people in Nigeria and other parts of the global South, they're paying more per kilowatt hour per day than we do in the US. It was always an infrastructural issue. And in the best of times, it was an annoyance. But that year, first, we lost power at my aunt's wedding. We expected it. We brought out some diesel generators and the fumes were really bad. And I remember complaining and just being like, yo, this is too much. And my cousins who are engineers, a couple of years older than me, said something that kind of let me know that this was the problem I might want to focus in on. They said, don't worry, you'll get used to it. And I remember thinking, all right, these are young Black men in Africa, which means they're men in Africa. They're men. They should be thinking about the world as just full of, their oyster, all these different things they want to do. These are engineers. They should be thinking about public-private partnerships, different innovations. And what they're telling me is that these fumes that we're breathing in, that are making me cough, that are making us all at least a little uncomfortable, that we know horrible for the environment, that we know it's horrible for us living here, that it's killing us. You're telling me that the best way to get over this problem is to just pretend like it's not happening. And when that happened, again, like I'm 17 and I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. And I think what hurts me even more is not that you're telling me to just get used to it, but that you in your 20s, that you think that this is the way to go. And so that stuck with me. I thought that was off. I came back, after the summer to school in the US. And that year, 3 members of my family passed away. So those 3 cousins, they lost their dad, right? My uncle, we both lost our grandfather. And basically we're cousins through my mom and their mom, we're sisters. They lost their younger sister, right? So my aunt, who is younger than I am right now, their aunt, younger than I am right now. And all of these people died because of something that was infrastructural, because of something that either could have been avoided, if not at least delayed. Because people don't always think about what happens if you get sick, you go to the hospital and you lose power. All these kind of different things compounding that don't make sense. And so that's finally what pushed me. And I said, I don't know how to solve all these big problems. I don't know. They're clearly infrastructural and that's scary. And I'm going to have to approach this in a way that makes sense for me at that age. But for damn sure, what doesn't make sense is sitting down in a world where members of my family are dying because of things that should obviously be fixed and that obviously could be better. And the idea that when they took their last breath, they felt the same way as my cousins, and just assuming that they could do nothing about it, that just didn't work. And so that's how I got into this. That's how I started. And it started first with some inventions, and Uncharted Power used to be Uncharted Play. And so I can get into that a little bit, but basically that's a little bit about me and how I got into this work.
It's an amazing background. Just to reflect on some of the things that you mentioned. I know you were speaking about how Black women, we feel like we have to put everything on our backs. I would even take it a little step further and say sometimes it's immigrant women, or just, because I come from an immigrant family as well. I'm the oldest of 4, and I definitely feel like I have to put my family on my back. I have to do what I have to do. I have to set an example for my siblings. And to believe it or not, what gave me the motivation and the drive was actually a passing in my own family of my grandfather, right? He worked so hard as an immigrant in this country to save up his money to go back home to Trinidad, and live his life. And, just to think of the concept of, in my sense was, working until retirement age to finally be able to live life was just I can't do that. I don't want that to be me. I don't want that for, my siblings, the rest of my family. And that's kind of what gave me my drive to make sure I wasn't ordinary, to make sure I stepped out of my own box and did things that I needed to do to create like generational wealth for those around me. So I could definitely, understand where you're coming from with that.
And, it's, going off of that too, right? It's like, I believe that that's where if people will give groups like us a chance, that's where you're going to see the next space of like just exponential innovation, because we're not fighting, like at the end, like I said, right? So entrepreneurship is problem solving without regard for resource, right? If one person's problem is I wish my shirts looked better untucked, no shade, that's cool, that's your problem. I'm so happy that those are your problems. But our problems are about recognizing that a whole group of people that we represent, that we connect with, are getting the short end of the stick in life.
Yeah.
And with that one life that, as far as we know, we have, right, that we can experience, that we're aware of. And so we are fighting, we are building technology, and we're thinking about solutions to get more out of life so that life doesn't feel like a regret on that last breath. Why women of color have to struggle with funding, to me doesn't make any sense. Because if I heard that, I'd be like if this was the Olympics and I hear one runner like, yeah, this is what I'm running for, I'd be like, I think I want to back the person who's running for their lives right now. And so to me though, that's a competitive advantage, right? Because what it did as well was force me to focus, not just, okay, so if intersectionality brought me to where I am, it made my intention so clear that it made it a little bit easier not to fall into some of the traps as I grew my company from energy generating soccer balls to an infrastructure platform. Because there were different times when there were sexy things that were offered because we were doing something that was exciting, but if it wasn't solving the problem that ended the lives of my family, right? If it wasn't solving the problem that derailed my aunt's wedding, which is even more like epic for me now, because I just got engaged last year and I'm about to get married in Nigeria next year. And I'm like, well, hell no, we definitely cannot use no diesel generators, y'all. Like, damn, like, we got to get this shit together. Like, so I'm over here like, nuh-uh, we gonna build this thing. So for me, it's like, the intention has always been so clear that I was comfortable taking learnings but pivoting, even if it meant pivoting away from something that people thought was lucrative, just because I knew, I was like, hey, I thought this would solve the problem, but it's not. And so we got to go where we think we're going.
So with the transition from Uncharted Play to Uncharted Power, can you talk a little bit more about that? Was that, that moment where you had like at your aunt's wedding and with your family passing, is that where that moment came about, where you made that transition for your organization?
So here's the thing, right? One of the biggest things I always tell people when it comes to innovation is that the most important part is actually the articulation of the problem. So it's one thing if you recognize that there is a problem, but the articulation of the causation of the problem, right? Let me say that, the causation of the problem, and being very, very clear that the assumption there will drive everything. So when I first got into this, I'm like 19 years old now, 19 going into 20. And I'm like, all right, what's wrong? What's happening? And I'm thinking infrastructure is scary, it's big, that's the core issue. But I'm seeing my cousins who are engineers, who aren't chemical, industrial engineers, electrical engineers, and they're not even trying to address the issue. They think it's too big, they think it's too scary, too whatever. So I'm like, the problem is that too many people don't think they have the agency or the ability to even attempt to address the issue. That was me. That's what I thought the cause was. I was like, if more people were inspired to realize that they could change their status quo, then the solution would happen. So I was like, all right, how do I then design a solution that inspires people to enter this space? And so in articulating the causation of the problem that way, I started to think back, in terms of what was working, what was inspiring, what did pull the passion and hope out of my cousins. And it was playing soccer, right? Like, it's the most popular sport in the world, especially out of the US. You probably know this, like, everyone loves to play that sport. Doesn't matter if you're good or bad at it, because my cousins were very much, to me, just like average. There was not, they were not spectacular at all at it. But they loved it and they played, and that's when they would have that bravado and that hope and that kind of like vibe that you need to have to change things. And so I was like, okay, so take a soccer ball and bridge the gap between what's working and what's not working in their perspective. And that's what led to the first invention of the socket, right? So it's an energy generating soccer ball that essentially had a dynamo system inside of it that could harness the energy of motion, the kinetic energy during play, and store that power inside the ball so it could be used as a very small off-grid power source for light, for some small electronics. And the whole idea was amplify existing behavior, right? Because if you want people to change, the best thing is to make it so that people don't feel like they're changing. I studied psych in school, Googled my way to everything else, literally have a PhD in Google, and like otherwise, like that's it.
I say the same thing.
So, like, oh Lord, like that. I wish you could get a certification in being able to do that Google search. You'd be like, well, let me just Faraday principle. Okay. How do I solder this? And so, so did that. Then had to go through the process, obviously, of like, understanding supply chain, all the hiccups you learn, whatever, but then produce something that was exciting and got people inspired. And we started to work with different nonprofits, different educational groups around the world to distribute the product, added in a educational component to actually provide a bit more structure on how do you look at your world and all the problems in it, see them not as obstacles, but as opportunities. How do you actually think about prototyping? How do you think about inventing with limited resources? So we launched that, put a lot of, these are all programs actually that we still have. Ended up creating an energy generating jump rope because we noticed that in some of the communities we were working in, especially the refugee camps, like soccer's definitely the most popular sport in the world, but sometimes you need a bit more nuance to work in some communities. So when we were working in a refugee camp on the border of Jordan and Syria, we learned that the girls are basically not allowed to play outside after the age of 12 because they're seen to be too tempting to the boys. And so I was like, so that means they can't get access to this ball. The ball's like, tried to make it so that they would just keep the boys inside. They were like, we don't play that. This is the border of Syria and Jordan. What are you talking about? And I was like, all right, bet, no problem. Went and created an energy generating jump rope, 15 minutes of jumping, power lights, all that good stuff. And so people were getting very excited and we were getting it out there, but it was kind of like, it did end up inspiring people. But it wasn't like people were like, now we're inspired to go and fix the infrastructure problem. They were just more like, now we're inspired. What's next, Jess? And I was getting the position where it's like, if I produce 1 million soccer balls, that would be nice. Maybe I'd inspire 1 million people, but I still had people in my family that were losing power. Like I still had to go to Nigeria every single year and see this. And so, we started to say, okay, well, maybe we just need to expand a bit more. Started to advise Fortune 100s on their embedded energy strategy, different consumer good products still, from energy generating strollers to the suitcases you could drag and charge your phone. And to be honest, it just like, it kind of felt kitschy. It felt a little bit like people were inspired, but I'm sitting here and I'm like, the whole point was inspiration was supposed to be part of the journey to fixing the problem. And my intention here ultimately is to address this problem. And so basically, it was around 2016 and a couple things happened. I started to notice that like, if we were gonna really push down the path of expanding beyond play, but working with other consumer product companies, it was still going to take a couple of years because of testing. You can't just put anything in a stroller. Like you gotta, people are just, you gotta test it and do a whole thing. And I was like, damn, like another 2 or 3 years. Like this just feels, the goal wasn't just to have, Park Slope moms charge their phone while they're like pushing their kids in strollers. And so basically I was like, all right, maybe they actually need like an infrastructural model. Like maybe the issue is like, it's too much of a leap for the market to go from consumer products to thinking about a new way of thinking about at least power from like on an infrastructural level. So why maybe we need to just do infrastructure. And at first I was like, well, again, as I said, infrastructure is scary, it's big, and like how, like, I felt like it was something that only a certain type of person could do. By the way, right now, I do not feel that way. Everybody's whack. Our shit's the best. Like, I don't feel that at all. Done the due diligence. No, nobody, no. But back then I did. And so there were really it was funny. What happened was interesting. It was, this is a weird time to bring it up. But so 2016 was the election, as we know. And here's what happened, right? So I started to see the writings on the wall, and I was like, I really think we're gonna have to translate our stuff to infrastructure. I did not expect Trump to win. I thought Hillary was gonna win. When I woke up and I saw that Trump won, I was like, holy shit. And I had to go to my team. My team was like crying, distraught, like people had their weaves out, like everything was crazy. Like I was just like, all right, we gotta get it together. And I was like, y'all, this is actually an inspirational moment. A lot of people sometimes ask me, were you inspired when Barack Obama was elected as the first Black president? I was like, I guess, because this dude is a constitutional scholar. This dude is brilliant. He should be president. Yeah. All because he's president doesn't mean I think I should be president. However, when Donald Trump won, that was the first time in my life that I said, if you hired me today to be president, I think I'd do a better job. That was the first time in my life that I thought, yeah, if this is what we're working with, yes, I could be president. And on that day, I said, guys, we've been telling ourselves for years that we're not the best people to do an infrastructure solution. But maybe what we need to ask ourselves is, are we the worst? Because while we're out here putting ourselves in a lane, fools that have no business running for president and doing a lot of stuff are doing it. And then I looked into it, I was like, do y'all know that Trump does infrastructure? That Trump does infrastructure? I was like, stop. So we then started to do the transition of our tech, and in 2017 we changed our name to from Uncharted Play to Uncharted Power, and that's how we got into it. Yeah.
That's an amazing story right there. The inspiration that came from the 2016 elections.
Listen, at this point now, that man, I don't know how he felt about the Dreamers, but he for damn sure helped a lot of people dream. It's yeah. Set the bar so low.
I can do this. I can do anything that I put my mind to, obviously.
I mean, so that's how we transitioned, and it still wasn't like a direct shot to exactly what we were doing. We still were on the power side of things and saying, hey, let's make energy generating speed bumps. They'll be like the precursor to energy generating roads, still thinking about amplifying existing behavior, the ubiquity of roads, the ubiquity of the ground. And that's when we start to realize just how fucked up infrastructure is. Like just how like it's a mess. Like the way it's done is it's so bad. The processes and the kind of like methodologies of how we create amazing like digital technology, amazing platforms, amazing visualizations, like what we do with data. Oh, Lord Jesus, the infrastructure is so behind. Like our power is so behind. Everything is just so bad. And, you know, in entering the room and seeing it is when we realized, we created this amazing speed bump solution, beat out the numbers of competing companies from Boston to Singapore, went to try to scale it and realized we couldn't because the receiving platform, the receiving kind of tool that the cities had was non-existent. So they couldn't, basically what we found was that it's true, whether it's in the US or Nigeria, all of these startups like us are creating all these amazing solutions. 5G, autonomous vehicles, all these things that should make it so that every single person has access to smart, sustainable infrastructure, but they don't because municipalities, city managers, like they don't have the tools that they need to actually integrate it, operate it. It's either really expensive or it just doesn't work. And so that's what finally got us to the point around 2018 when we said, okay, this is, even though we're called Uncharted Power, and this is about more than power, infrastructure is experienced in an integrated way. So we need to think about a platform that integrates power, civil, and smart city infrastructure in the way that allows it to scale cost effectively to everyone. And at the underlying part of it, we said, data, the lack of data is one of the core reasons. That's why I was so excited to do this chat with you and the work you've done, because the lack of data was in fact the main thing that was blocking everything. And so that's how we then said, okay, here's how we're going to build not just Uncharted Power, but just Uncharted. And we're now seeing the proof points on that in a way that it keeps me going and excited despite being in this for 10 years, right? I find it to be a blessing that we had the guts to enter these rooms and realize that there was nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be intimidated by. And I think if there's one thing that I hope people take away from this conversation, it's that armed with data, armed with intention, right? Armed with a purpose, nobody can throw shade in the room that you want to get into. No room is too gilded to make a difference. And so that's how we ended up where we are now.
Oh, no, that's amazing. I definitely appreciate you putting the plug in there for data, because I'm on the side of it to whereas now that you have the data, right? So right now you're saying that there's a lack of data, but once you have the data, what I was noticing, but there was a lack of diverse individuals who could specialize in helping you now understand and translate that data. So that's kind of like the bridge that I'm trying to fill, in the gap that I'm trying to fill, to where we can have more people that look like you and I, that are understanding, helping gather the data, gather the data, and then analyze the data, come up with the insight out of it, and could continue to do great work, right? So
that's actually what we're seeing, like the data. So one, sometimes, people like infrastructure, like sometimes the data just falls to nowhere. So it's like multiple levels of issues, right? All of these different things, whether they're digital or physical products in our world, whether it's Wi-Fi beacons or power systems or EV charging or digital health or whatever. So one is like making sure they all are generating data, right? Most of them are, but then it's like, okay, well, how do you integrate that data? Because and then think about the relationships to actually allow for operational efficiencies, right? And then like predicting certain things, and that's just that isn't happening. And then the visualizations that people are trying to put in the market, girl, if you saw that, you'd be like, this is so whack. Like we'll talk offline. It's like the most technical people are building the most technical, overwhelming dashboards and handing them to cities and saying, use it. And they're like, I can't. And so they're just like, so basically the cities are like, nah. And I'm talking about, I don't want to say any names, but like the big companies are doing this, like the big ones. Yeah. And I'm just like, again, it goes back to the same thing where I'm like, right, well, I'm thinking about how my mom could use this. I'm thinking about how you amplify existing behavior. I'm thinking about how if I didn't need a training session to use Gmail, to use Google search, to use Instagram, then why do I need a training session to use this visualization of my city to be able to build and manage, right, and maintain my infrastructure? And so, and then beyond that, as you said, the person who's actually designing the models to say, well, this is how a broken sidewalk affects a power line, affects this, they may not have the nuances of how some other people experience their lives. And so data scientists of color, women, like of every walk of life, that should be our biggest push. Like people always say like, oh, I'm assuming like I'm just gonna make my kid do coding. I was like, can you just have your kid be a data scientist? Actually, it's really not like, the coding is like cool. Like it's like a linguist. Yes, that's wonderful. But it's one thing to speak a language. It's another thing to know what's being said regardless of the language.
Yeah.
And the lack of data scientists. I'm not just saying this because this is Tableau. I'm saying this is, in my experience in my life, this is where I am today. Right now, the lack of data scientists that look like us is an urgent and important problem that we need to address now.
Oh, now. Absolutely, 100% agree. I want to stay on the topic of data, and given that this is a data and diversity event, I want to understand how you and your organization use data and diversity together, right? Like, what are you doing internally?
Well, so the good thing and how we've kind of grown is that you'd be surprised how easy it is to kind of have some ingrained diversity initiatives when the leader on the top is diverse. Like, you'd be surprised how it's not that complicated. Like, I will be the first person to be like, where are all the women in here? How come only a black person? Like it's almost like I don't have to be taught to notice that I feel like a chocolate chip in milk right now. So, you know what I mean? And at the same thing, it's like, so like, to be honest, it's like, I lead based on my intersectionality as well, right? So I want to make room for people of different races, different religions, different genders, different sexual orientations, different immigration status. We have dreamers on our team. We have multiple immigrants on my team. Why? Because I got immigrants in my family, and like, I know what they're going through. I know, like, when they do their visa, what's popping and how to help them with that. I'm not afraid of that. We have people with different issues in terms of disabilities. And so, I mean, for me, I know that it's not just about like diversity. I feel like someone's going to call me a racist afterthought. I believe in the strength of what we produce based on who we have in the room. I have no problem calling it out because I can easily say I'm uncomfortable with the fact that we don't have enough women on this team, even if we can't fix it, right? Like right now, a lot of our tech team leans a little bit more male than I would have liked. I've called it out already. I was like, I don't like this. I see that we got black, brown, and whatever, and all that good stuff, but I don't like this. I'm gonna call it out. I'm gonna be on your ass to make sure you don't do some stupid shit that only a woman would catch if she was there. Like, I say it out loud. Yeah. I don't care about being politically correct. And it surprises them, but I'm like, it might have been hard for the cis white male who's in his 50s to say this, but definitely not for me. I have nothing to lose. I'm like, so that, I think that that's part of it, creating an open space and an open dialogue and making sure that the leadership, they believe this not because they feel like they are supposed to, but in their soul, they know that for me to be comfortable working, like, I need to have a space of people who represent all the walks of life. And so we have, the executive team right now, the C-suite, my CTO is a black man. My chief community officer is a half Mexican, LGBTQ. We have a dreamer who's a head of talent. We have a broad community of individuals. And it's still, if anything, the work more becomes then just when people come to the team, especially when you're getting really top talent, making them comfortable with the new normal of how we want things and balancing speed with integrating different cultures and figuring out how they work together. But yeah, honestly, it's just not that hard if we're at the top. I don't know what else.
Exactly. Yeah. I get that question all the time from millennials in data. How do you recruit or get such diverse students or participants? And I'm like, look who's leading the organization. Look who's teaching them, right? You know, a black data analyst. So of course they're driven to us because we represent essentially what they want to be someday. So absolutely. So how would you recommend getting buy-in from leaders who believe diversity is the goal, without understanding inclusion is the true gap?
Ooh. So I'm so happy you highlighted the difference between diversity and inclusion, because inclusion is, again, first of all, I think everything starts with your leadership style, right? So creating space for differing perspectives and differing experiences and making sure that people don't feel like they have to code switch. I actually believe that the remote work has helped, because you don't have to do this whole, like, are you coming after for us to go and, I don't know, play lacrosse or whatever the hell like people do? And it's like, I don't want to, like, I got to go and get my hair done or something else. So first is just like, trying to, I think it's good for people to find bridges. I think it's good to create open spaces. Last year was a big year where I think we put that to the test. So the biggest thing that I did last year to create a space around inclusion was just really to promote open spaces for conversation. So in the beginning of the pandemic, when we shifted to remote work, we would do these morning stand-ups, and they weren't really scrums. It was really more a space for context. And so I came straight to the team and I said, listen, the last thing I'm going to do is pretend like I'm an all-knowing person this year. The best thing I can do is be honest with you, not just as a leader, but as a human being. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to start not with just a list of what we're each trying to do out of context, but we create this time, because if there's something popping off, if your family member is dying from COVID right now, if that's what we also need to talk about. We've got to bring those things together and then see how we can tie that authentically to the work we're trying to do. But sometimes it won't be authentic. Sometimes you will need to take that week off. And so, for me last year, that meant, I remember it was at the end of May, and it was like, okay, like the Christian dude happened with the trying to go and see birds in the park and getting called out. Ahmaud Arbery happened, and George Floyd. And I remember talking to two other women of color on the team and just being like, yo, the fuck. And then we were like, we need to talk to the whole team about this, because I'm sitting here, I was like, it is hard to be Black right now and work, and like, I don't know if I can do it. And we pulled everyone together, and I cried, we talked, and we created an open space and let everyone speak about the pain, and we communicated the pain we were feeling and the anger we were feeling unadulterated. The team came closer together, right? And I think it was right before what ended up being almost like the big protests and everything. And I think I literally said, like, check on your Black friends, because like, we're not happy, and I don't know, but I feel like it's not gonna be good. And then that weekend everything happened, and people are like, thanks for giving us a heads up, Jess. Like, I was like, I was trying to tell you, it's true. We had similar things with things that were happening with the kind of lack of stability with the Dreamer situation, LGBTQ, trans life, like everything. We created that space when someone was like, life is getting heavy, I'm gonna tell you why. It helped, right? And so I think that's one thing, is that so many times I think people often feel uncomfortable leading in that way, right? I can imagine if you're a cis white man too, you probably feel very uncomfortable leading those conversations. So you don't have to. That's cool. Enable it though. Empower an individual who can kind of break into a few more of those like more broad intersectional points, and let that person drive. Let that person, and trust that person, and then follow that person to open yourself up and find your points, right? And be able to say, listen, I know for damn sure that like the authenticity of this conversation will blind, like based on who's leading it. But I'm here, I'm ready to listen, I'm ready to learn, I'm ready to say sorry, I'm ready to try to be a better person first and foremost, before I'm your boss, before I'm anything else. I want to be a better person, and I want you to know who I am.
Yeah.
That way and then you'd be surprised, maybe they'll come and say, hey guys, like, I got family in Trump country and half of them have COVID. That's also valid. That is a real pain point. And so I think that is the key, truly attempting to do that. And in larger organizations, splinter off into smaller ones and try to recreate that smaller community. It can't happen with 150 people on the line. It needs to be around 10 people, maybe max 15, and make it consistent and make it almost onerous for the first couple of months until you've gotten into a flow of things. And when you start to have new people, you can expand from there.
Absolutely. It's really about making sure that you create an authentic safe space, right? Not just creating a safe space because it's the hot word of the year, right? But making sure that it's authentic. And if you don't know how to be authentic, making sure that you put somebody in place, that can reach out to those individuals. No, I totally agree. So,
it's hard too, though, because I know people live different 2020s. 2020, you could just like 2020 was different people lived different 20s. I would say it like that. And if you lived a 2020 where your biggest inconvenience was like having to stay in your nice home, and that's about it, but most of your family could work from home as well, so they were comfortable. You were able to get out of the city and do whatever. If that was your situation, you may not even know that there are other things that people could be experiencing that could be part of their lives and happening there. And again, I think you also, at the end of the day, leaders have to ask themselves, when no one's there, when it's just you looking at yourself in the mirror, who do you want to be? What kind of person do you want to be? Are you still ready to learn and grow? Because it's the easy part to learn how to, set objectives for a quarter, and follow up and blah, blah, blah. It's the hard part to continuously, I think, connect with yourself and ask yourself if you are still learning and growing and becoming a better person that then can inherently lead better people.
Okay. No, that definitely makes sense. Yeah. Last year was interesting. I would say for all of us. Like even being at home, right? Breonna Taylor, right? Look at her being at home in her own space, and look what happened there. So no, I definitely appreciate you for bringing that up. I want to talk more about COVID and really how COVID has had an impact on the Black and Brown communities. It's really hurt, our communities. We've probably gotten it the worst. In your opinion, what are some solutions to that?
Oof, oof. COVID is tough.
Yeah.
COVID's tough as it relates to data. I'll tell you right now, data and our ability to visualize data for every average person, the answers are almost always somewhere in the data. So I think like there's a massive connection there, and and for just the work that you do and the work that Tableau enables. But with data, we have to talk about privacy, and we have to talk about the balance of privacy with attempting to do the whole tracking situation and this and that and everything that goes into it. So from the perspective of our community, the Black and Brown communities, for me, it goes back to, the infrastructure we need to be able for everyone to shift. The majority of Black and Brown communities, the people who work there did not have the luxury of working from home. So that was a macro issue, right? That goes back to what opportunities are available to them, and the way we think about ensuring that at least their kids have access to basic things like internet. My fiance's family is from the South. They're in Mississippi, Louisiana. And I think Louisiana had like 3 or 4 storms that made them lose, like people had to leave their homes during the pandemic.
Yeah.
A little bit of rain, or even a lot of bit of rain, shouldn't put you in that position where you don't have power and all those different things. And so I think that it all comes down to like equitable infrastructure for sure, just to give people as many people as possible the ability to recede into their homes safely and sustainably, and still be able to provide for their families. More broadly, in terms of what it takes to address COVID, I mean, a couple of good things are happening. Apparently, it's the first time in history that scientists are actually part of the president's cabinet. That's nice. That seems about right. The person, just anybody, like, again, I think that's good that we're starting to lean on science a bit more. I think there's gonna have to be we have a lot to undo in terms of misinformation. In terms of misinformation that came in over the last 4 years, right? Yeah. Nobody was complaining about seatbelts that we were forced to wear because it was seen to be safe for you and safe for everybody else. But somehow masks became something where it defied a lot of things, right? And so I think a lot, again, going back again to the data part of things, the role that misinformation has played in worsening all of the tragedies that we have going on in our world, from COVID to climate change and all of that, our ability to find out what's true and hold on to that as individuals is of the utmost importance. Mm-hmm. I think understanding how many layers data analysis goes through before you receive information as well is going to become something that's almost as important as counting and learning your ABCs. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I think specifically with COVID, I think there's reason to be at least hopeful, cautiously optimistic with this new administration, and the fact that they're not running away from the existence of it. The fact that they're putting in the right people. They actually, I think Biden put someone's going to lead his COVID policy is a 26-year-old Black woman, actually from my tribe, in Nigeria. And I was like, I'm sure she'll be all right. She'll be, so those things are very, very cool to see. But, I think at the end of the day right now, we also have to kind of grapple with the world that will probably never go back to normal. I think we're going to have to grapple with the world where we now just have things that are presently dangerous around us. And we're going to have to think about how we design systems to protect us from these things. And I do personally believe that our ability to really leverage data science and true edge cloud, decentralized cloud compute technology, so that you don't have this like aggregate Westworld insight thing that has all of our info, but the ability to actually take that data that's relevant in a local setting and use that data in a local setting to help people, but also keep their information private. I think those are going to be the two key things that we're going to need to invest in as a society over the next decade to get the world that we want.
No, absolutely. I want to talk about data accessibility, actually. So obviously with COVID data, how accessible do you think data should be to the general public, right?
I think for something like COVID, we would have gone, the way I would have done it is I would have said, open source everything we know in aggregate. Like I would have brought on the most brilliant database developers, and I would have said, listen, I want us to figure out how we can aggregate as much of this raw data and make it open source and leave it at that probably, but then invite people from different walks of life to start to build in the analysis tools on top of it. Because the way a cloud architect from Connecticut might decide that the relational data should flow up and come to somebody, right, might be different from how, someone from Compton might view it and say, well, actually, we should be tracking this, people who eat this food or do this because I know this. Like we have different ways of relating things to actually make the data make sense. So people are over here saying, oh, we think it might be blood type. We think it might be this. We think it might be that. For all we know, it might have been the damn Popeye sandwich. We don't know, but they're not even thinking about it, right? Like they're not building that relational, that kind of knowledge graphing that I think would happen. And so I would have built the largest like federal database of the raw data like streams. And then I would have hosted like I would have basically had a full campaign and hosted almost like a data hackathon for people to come in and build relational graphs based off of that data that then would start to feed up into some insights for us to think about what's going on. And then, yes, you should have some of those brilliant UX and UI people thinking about how we design interfaces for the different people who need to go into this, right? So understanding what's going on with COVID shouldn't just be a Google search and then seeing news reports. There should have been I think there should be a US backed website, like a US government backed website where you understand, okay, are you under or over 65? All the things that they think are impactful. Are you under or over 65? Do you have any, current medical issues or not? Are you this, or like you could actually click and based on who you are, and then they would curate the information that's most relevant to you based on what you said versus having you sift through it. I think that if they did that, but most importantly, if they made it all open source so that the best developers could be creating solutions and have those bubble up to the top, I think that I think we might have more people engaged in the solution right now. Right now, I think it's not easy for anybody to say, I want to come up with a way to really help without just getting kind of some of the open source data, right? But that's what I think.
Being honest with the data, because I don't know if you remember the Florida data scientist whose house got stormed, and who got fired because she was trying to, she basically didn't want to put out the information that they were telling her to put out so that Florida could get reopened. But that's a different conversation there in itself.
But it's the exact same thing I'm talking about. It's like, and the problem is there's a person there that's basically a gatekeeper to that raw data set. Now, if there was some way to digitize the COVID tests where like, just straight up, okay, this it's digitized automatically. It's not me to data science it out. It's happening, and that's open source to everybody. I think that the lack of transparency in the way, so there's been like almost utmost transparent, sort of actually, because a lot of the platforms have taken away some of their transparency with their algorithms and all that stuff. But for sure, the lack of transparency in the COVID data, I think, has slowed down our ability to get to a solution.
Yeah, Oh, absolutely. 100% agree. So I know we're coming up on time, and I definitely want to leave room for the Q&A that we have from the live audience. So my final question is, I know you've done some amazing work over the course of your career. You've done a lot to uplift, individuals and minority communities. I know just having this conversation with you today is uplifting to me. So what are some tips that you would give to others who feel as though they have to work harder to be successful?
You do, but here's the fun part about it. If let's say you have two people. One person has been training with 50-pound weights. The other person's been training with 10-pound weights, right? Or even, let's say the person, whatever, 50, 35, whatever. But the point is, you've been training harder. You've had to. If you want to do something that's really disruptive, that's going to change the world and make the world a better place, the world has a lot of big, complicated problems. The world has a lot of 60-pound problems, right? Like, they're heavy. When you then get your moment, your opportunity, and you see that problem, who do you think is going to be more likely to be successful? The person who's been training with 50-pound weights this whole time, or the person who's been training with 10-pound weights? And so the way I think about it is, yeah, for damn sure, it was so much harder to raise money, still is, so much harder to build teams. Everything is harder, but fortunately, I'm trying to tackle a massive, heavy ass problem like infrastructure. So now I'm going in and I'm like, okay, bet, I see what needs to be done. And all the other dudes here, they've been out here with their little 10-pound Suzanne Summers weights, and I'm over here, and I'm like, all right, let's see who can do this. And so you are going to have to do more. You are going to have to do what feels like twice as much to get half as far. But depending on what your goal is, right? The journey, yes, is one thing, but what your goal is, if you see it as a training ground for your greatness, and if you see it as a training ground for being able to tackle the things that seem impossible, right? Like, then it's different. In some ways, I kind of feel like being a woman of color, being a Black woman in this space, and each day you survive, it's like superhero training. Each day you survive a hit that no one else had, you get so that when the shit really starts and people start punching, you can take those hits. And I think that framing might help you feel. It can still be frustrating, but it helps. It helps on the kind of day in and day out.
So I'm gonna plug in my own question right here. So I have a question of, what does success look like to you? So when you're taking your last breath, right, and you're saying you have no regrets, what does your life's mission of success look like to you?
I've always said that success is not really, I think, the goal that people should have. I think the goal should be happiness, and success is simply kind of perceived to be one of the tools that make you happy, but it's not everything. And so when I think about what makes me happy, right, it's one, I feel very blessed with the skills and different things that God gave me. And I'm super weird. Like, I believe that I almost treat God like my biggest investor. And I'm like, I got to keep giving him an ROI so he doesn't take away some of the stuff that he gave me.
Oh, yeah.
And so, one, like, did I do everything I could with what God gave me? That's almost like, did I do everything I could with what God gave me? And did I do it in a way that brought as many people along with me?
Yeah.
And I think at that moment, if I can say, I did, right? With balance, with sustainability, right? Like, when you know that it's like, it's not all, that doesn't mean you push yourself so you can't fight again, but in a way that you can keep getting up to fight and fight and fight. If you've had a long life, God willing, where you did everything you could with what God gave you, and you brought as many people along with you, family, friends, partners, that's it. Like, I'm going to feel good about it. And I think what makes me really lucky, truly, truly lucky, is that I found the door to the thing that was worth kind of like that showed me the world. I never would have thought when I was 19 that I'd be doing what I'm doing right now.
Yeah.
And I would not have found that door if I went down the path that everyone else was going. Where I went to school, everyone was becoming consultants and this and that. Everyone had a 2-year path to this, a 2-year path to that. And I went a very different route. I was like, I'm gonna do this.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think I have a very lofty thing that I've been working on for the last decade, longer if you count from when I was 19. I'll be 33 in like 3 weeks. So I've been doing this for a hot minute, like to say the least, as far as millennials go. But the reason why I feel so blessed is that, like, when I ask myself, are you happy? Yes, right? It's hard, it's heavy. As I said, there were easier ways out. But this, because of all the things that it hits for me in my life and who it impacts, and the fact that even though I didn't always believe it, as I get more into it, I realized that there are many things about me uniquely that are uniquely suited for this role, even though no one else looks like me in this world.
Yeah.
That kind of, the more you kind of find that alignment in your life, that is success, right? And for me, that is happiness. So, yeah.
I could totally agree with that, for sure. I wake up blessed every day. You know, that's the first thing that I look at. I always got to say thank you because I'm scared something's gonna get taken away. Right? So I never.
Right? Oh my God! No, literally from early age, I'd be like, man, and it's like that fear, just like I used to tell my partner, I was like, I'm afraid the other shoe's gonna drop. He's like, what are you talking about? I was like, I don't know, but I'm not going to be, to me, the best way you make sure something doesn't get taken away from you is by doing everything you can with it. And,
exactly.
You know, that gratitude and that appreciation, it builds. It definitely builds.
I'm not going to ask for anything today. I'm going to just say thank you.
Thank you for my new thing is, like, and I learned from Tabitha Brown, I was like, thank you for putting me on the list of people who woke up this morning. Okay,
exactly.
Let's go. Let's see what we can do.
Hit the ground running, for sure. All right, I'm gonna transition to the audience questions. It's definitely been a pleasure. Let me transition to some of the questions from the audience. So, how do you convince decision makers who've traditionally relied on relationships, optics, and lived experiences to buy into using data to shape their thinking?
Ooh, I mean, we're still figuring it out. We are still figuring it out. I will say that sometimes, you know, it's what I'm finding is that it's all about how you package it. A lot of people, especially people in power, are afraid of the truth. They're afraid of the truth about themselves. This is a totally normal human thing. Mm-hmm. You know, it's why, you know, people want to give feedback when you tell them, oh, we're going to do a 360, they get nervous, right? Like, and it's like, especially if you're in power, you're the decision maker, you're afraid that whatever information comes out will be information that either makes it so that you lose some of your power or that is perceived to be that you shouldn't be the person in power. And so if data means truth, and if the truth shakes the status quo and you're benefiting from the status quo, that's the scary part. And so, I mean, this could be like a separate convo, right? For whoever asked that question, like we could brainstorm some ideas, but what I think is that the first thing to do then is to frame it not as something that shakes their power, but amplifies their power. Mm-hmm. The first thing to do is to make them feel like, so I think that the key is not immediately to say, here's all the data for everyone, but to say, hey, I want to give you more information so that you can be better. And I'm not going to share this with anybody. This is just info for you. Info for you, and you can kind of so that at the very least somebody has this set up in a certain way. And then once they get comfortable, once you've given them some time to meet what's being said in the truth, right? And like, and God willing, this is an individual who, when given the time to fix their problems, will hopefully fix them and not just say, I don't care. Then I think you can start to look at different ways to bring people into the conversation, but with different entry points. So not everyone, I don't believe that everyone should see the same single pane of glass of data. That I actually think is very overwhelming, right? But I do think that there should be a very authentic entry point for each person to be able to enter the conversation. And there should be transparency, I think, in the way that insights and decisions can be made when everyone's in there. But the first thing is the person who kind of will look the worst, if depending on the data, making them not feel like this is going to be an attack on them. So I will let you know how it goes. Let's touch base in a year, working on a couple things, but that's what I think.
All righty. Another one from the audience. I think it would be amazing to have diverse representation in leadership, but for those of us, most of us in the middle or even more junior, call out issues of inclusion in their workplace in a way. Okay, let me rephrase that. But for those of us, most of us in the middle or even more, what are some or call out issues of inclusion in their workplace? Thank you for helping me out there, Jordan. I think we're missing a word in here and I'm stumbling. Okay, there we go. How can we call out issues of inclusion in their workplace in a way that would have impact?
It's really hard because, and I think it's fair to be hard. You know, my partner works in corporate America. He works for a big law firm, and you know, there was definitely a moment during the summer when I think people, at the very least, pretended to be more receptive because companies knew there was going to be a backlash, and so seizing on those moments, I do think there's something to be said about attempting to seize on certain moments when like the kind of general public zeitgeist is focused in on it and seeing what you can get. And they were able to put together kind of a committee of different individuals, different Black lawyers, and work within and kind of push certain demands. But it took time and it was onerous and it was hard. I mean, the radical thing I would say is if you work somewhere, and in 2021, if you work somewhere where there isn't some structure where you can speak to an actually good HR representative, talent representative, or your boss, and frame it as, I believe that the company will grow and we will generate more sales and we'll have better products and better solutions if. So tie it to the bottom line. Not I think. Find the research, find the psychology, find the how, like, okay, if you have inclusion and if people aren't feeling like this, they put 25% more into this. Find the numbers of how like diverse teams, you know, how they execute, and say, I believe that we can up our numbers this quarter, that we can produce better if we do this, and here's why. And you know, at the end of the day, some people will be receptive. A small percentage, I think, will be receptive because they're going to get it. And some will just not. Mm-hmm. Or they're going to think that they're so confident in the status quo in their group and themselves doing it, right? That conceptually, if you say something like, hey, I really think there should be a woman on the tech team, they might be like, I guess, but they're just so confident. In those situations, I'm going to be honest with you, those are dinosaurs and they're just not going to last. So we have this saying in Nigeria, we say you can't bend dried wood. After a while, when wood is old and old, it loses its water and you can't bend it. If you try to bend it, it's going to break. Mm-hmm. And so you have two options. You break that wood, you break it if you feel like that's necessary. Or if I'm being honest, you see that your understanding of this, your recognition of the role that inclusion could play in growing a business and growing an opportunity, you have that unique perspective here in your space or industry, and this person does it. I would actually now say that that's your competitive advantage. Mm-hmm. I would start to moonlight and work on a solution or work on an organization that respects that perspective, and I would start a competing company. Like, I don't even know what else to say. I know that sounds crazy, but like the reality of the situation is like, especially, it's one thing if it's like a smaller instance, you know, you push, you do what you can, and you create peer-to-peer groups to help you go. But if it's something where it's like, yo, you're missing out on a massive market because of this, and the person's just like, no, we just want to keep doing things the same way, then you do it. Then you go and do it. Because at the end of the day, there's so much money actually being left on the table because of a failure of internally getting diversity and inclusion right. that I think that instead of us trying to force these backwards bosses to see the opportunity, we should just be taking that opportunity and being like, all right, cool, keep doing your thing. Keep on with your Blockbuster and your Sears. I'm gonna go ahead and build Netflix. I can't. And that's, it's ballsy, but again, it's for the things that we're trying to change, we're gonna need to be a bit ready, I think, to take on the big powers that be and do what needs to be done.
Exactly. And it goes back to what you said earlier about looking at a situation not as a problem, but as an opportunity. So totally agree with that. Our final question will be, how do we up our weight? I struggle because I also want work-life balance while being a heavy hitter. Not sure if that is possible.
It's hard. And if there's anything that I actually have to practice constantly, it's that. Last year I was so big on just kind of survival and trying to push, like I lost a lot of the things I had built in 2019 around my self-care. And I had developed this thing called the Self-Care 5, where I tried to work out, drink a gallon of water, get at least 7 hours of sleep, eat healthy, meditate. And most days I would not get all 5, but the whole point is you have your 5 and you get at least 3 out of 5, that's good. And then last year it was just like, is there gonna be an apocalypse? Are those aliens? What hornets? Hornets are doing what? So that was a lot. This year, I made a point to say, all right, let's kind of bring it back and create sustainability in my day. And so, a big thing for me is as much as we're pushing to make a lot of things happen, trying my best to kind of keep a certain bit of a sacred routine in the mornings. And everyone's different. Some people need their sacred routine in the mornings. Some people need their sacred routine in the evenings. For me, it's really the mornings. I know that's when I like to not have meetings, be able to think, be able to kind of whatever is when I like to get my workouts in if I can. And so just trying to create that structure and trying to kind of create boundaries, especially in the world that we're in. I think it's not like you have to clock in and clock out of work. So creating boundaries for yourself on your work and not just saying, from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., I'm just working nonstop, but actually taking those minutes, taking a walk, doing whatever, and kind of obsessing around that structure.
Yeah.
And that structure, I think, is really, really key. And I think I will say that it's not something that is totally figured out, because when you have something that you really want done, you want to do it with all that you have. But I also think just attempting to meditate on patience is a big one too. Yeah. So versus oh my God, we just have to get this pilot for us in the ground now. It's all right, in an effort for this to be sustainable, this is going to take 3 weeks instead of 1 week. Can we work with that? Can we live with that? Can we plan with that? That's the big thing.
Oh, absolutely. And I think last year, actually, I've really been working on being intentional with my time, right? I have it down to the minute sometimes, every hour, exactly what I'm going to be doing. I reflect in the morning time. And so I have my morning ritual. At night, I have a night ritual that ends with a shower. And I always say, I'm reflecting and then I'm washing off that day's energy and preparing for the next day. So that's what I have to do mentally to get myself in a space. And then typically my Friday nights and my Saturdays are my care days, and then Sunday nights I'm back in the ground running, preparing for the week ahead.
Exactly. I just started doing evening walks, which have been everything, because before it was just wake up, work out, meditate, do some kind of personal work. Then I'm always in meetings, I'm always in stuff. And now it's I just started this week actually adding in the walks, and it's been so nice, almost as that way of kind of it's just, especially with the world, it's so easy to realize, have I left my apartment? No, I haven't left my apartment in weeks. And I'll walk a few miles actually. And it's really, it somehow, it takes whatever tiredness I have, whatever I have, the heaviness of the day, and it kind of just frames it, puts it, aside. So yeah.
Good. Awesome. So I'm at the top of the hour. For those tuned in, what's the best way to follow your journey and get in touch with you?
So Instagram is probably the best way to follow. On Jessomatt, JESSOMATT. So that's probably the best way to follow me. I'm also on Twitter as well. And then yeah, you can get in touch with me through those platforms too.
Awesome. I'm definitely going to follow you. All righty. Thank you all for joining today's event. We hope you learned about ways data and analytics can be used to create a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable future for all. And thank you to everyone who has shared their ideas about how they'd like to get involved or about topics they'd like to address in upcoming events. We look forward to working with you and seeing you at future events. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
It's been a
Thank you,
pleasure.
guys. Thank you for having me.
All righty. Bye-bye.